Hi there, in this video we are going to see on how to analyze customer complaints. Statistics indicate that 90% of the customers would leave an enterprise if their complaints are not managed correctly. So it's very important to understand what the customers are complaining about and then react to it. Now there are multiple ways to analyze customer complaints and I broadly split them into two. So we can analyze complaints by time, which will help us understand are there any specific time periods where there are more complaints compared to others. We can also analyze complaints by issue, which will help us understand what are the top issues which are faced by our customers. Sentiment analysis helps to understand what is the sentiment of a complaint. Now, generally speaking, sentiment of a complaint is usually negative, but sentiment analysis helps us to understand on how negative is the complaint. Now, there are analytics which will help us act efficiently on the complaints, and one such analytics is text clustering. It will help us cluster similar looking complaints together so that they can be managed efficiently. And then you also have very interesting text summarization, which will help us summarize very long text into just short sentences. Now, this is very useful in order to understand clearly what the complaint is about and thus act upon it. Now for this video, we are going to use an AI assistant called as Data Jarvis. This AI assistant is developed by me in order to accelerate my video production, and it is going to take different questions in plain English and then come out with different insights and analytics about the customer complaints. You can also try out Data Jarvis. The link is in the description below. And if you like it, please do consider subscribing to it. All right, let us now look at the data. So the data is coming from CFPB, which is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and this data is mostly related to banking. So this data has got the date of the complaint. It has also got the product. It means the banking product about which the customers are complaining. You also have the issue, which is what exactly the complaint, and then you also have the consumer narrative. Now this narrative is the actual complaint which is in text format which has been written by the customer, and this consumer narrative could be quite long. There could be complaints which could be more than 1,000 words long. You also have some company details, which is the banking details to which the complaint has been made, and at the end I've also added a column called as count, which is populated by 1, and this column which we are going to use it later for all different insights. All right, now we are all set to load this data into Data Jarvis. So let me go to the platform Data Jarvis and we are going to upload the data. And voila, I have all my data is now available in the platform. So now let us start chatting with this data. And let me start by asking a question which will help us understand the complaints over time. And let us ask a question such as, give me a line plot between the date received and the sum of count. So here we see the result given by Data Jarvis. It's a line plot which will help us understand how many complaints were received on what date. And this is very useful because it helps us to see are there any specific dates where there were more complaints compared to others. So this is pretty interesting because it gives a time trend of different complaints. Now let us go to the next question, and here let us say we would like to understand what are the type of issues which are faced by our customers, and we can ask a question such as, give me a bar plot between the issue and the sum of count. And voila, Data Jarvis is going to reply back to us with a bar graph, and you can see that what are the top type of issues which are faced. And here we can see that the top issue which is faced by our customer is related to attempts to collect debt which are not owned, a pretty serious thing. And then you also have other types such as communication tactics, false statements, as well as banks have made threats to take legal actions. So this is a nice way to get insights about what are the different issues which our customers are facing. Let us now go to the next one, which is sentiment analysis. So as I've said earlier, sentiment of complaint is usually negative, but let us ask this question to Data Jarvis that give me sentiment analysis of the consumer complaint narrative. And voila, in a while, I see this output data, and in this output data, I see that each complaint has been assigned two new columns. One is the sentiment and one is the probability. So you can see that sentiment of a complaint is usually negative, but the probability is an indication on how negative is the complaint. So let us take the first line, which has got a probability of almost about 90%. Now, if I see that complaint related to this, I can see that this is pretty long and it is pretty heavy. It is about litigation, it is about making some legal case against the bank. So it is a pretty heavy complaint, and it's for this reason the probability score is almost about 90%. Let us now sort this data so that we have the complaints which has got less probability score at the top. And here I see a complaint which has got a probability score of about 73%. So let us see what is the corresponding complaint. And here you can see that this is not a very long complaint like the previous one. It is not a very heavy complaint like previous one. And it's for this reason this has got a probability score of 73%. So this column of probability is a very interesting one because it helps us to prioritize on how to handle the complaints. We can start with the complaints which has got very high probability. It means that very heavy complaints where the customer is really dissatisfied, and then move towards complaints which has got a low probability score. Now let us go to another interesting analytics which is around text clustering. So text clustering is going to help us group similar looking text together or similar looking complaints together so that they can be managed effectively. So let us give a question to Data Jarvis such that give me a text clustering of consumer complaint narrative and make 5 clusters. And voila, in a while I see that Data Jarvis has come back with a table which has got each and every complaint, and then it has also got a column called as cluster. And let us now sort this column cluster and let us see all the complaints which are there in the cluster number 0. So here we can see that all these complaints correspond to things which are related to harassments, to threats, as well as there is an indication of making a lawsuit against the bank. So this is a very nice way to group all the similar looking complaints, in this case all the complaints which talk about harassment or threats, and we can come out with a global strategy on how to manage all these types of complaints. Now text clustering is also going to give us a scatter plot, and in this particular scatter plot each dot corresponds to a complaint and the color of the dot is corresponding to a cluster. And you can see that all the dots which has got similar color are grouped together, and this means that our clustering technique has worked well because this just confirms the formation of clusters. Now let us go to the next interesting insights, which is around text summarization. Now customer complaints can be quite long. In some cases it can be more than 1,000 words, but let us try to summarize into short summaries, and let us ask a question to Data Jarvis such as give me a text summarization of the consumer narrative column. So Data Jarvis is going to reply back with a table, and let us take the first complaint as an example. And here you can see that this complaint is quite long. This complaint is what we already seen earlier. And let us now see what is the magic of summarization, and did we get a highly summarized version of this. And yes, we have a very highly summarized version which is just few lines, and just reading this few lines helps us to easily understand what the complaint is about. And if you understand correctly, you can also act on it rapidly. In addition, you also have two new columns. You have an source length, which is the length of the complaint, original complaint, and then you also have a length of the summary. And you can also plot these two columns as a scatter plot, and you can here see that you have some complaints which are more than 1,000 words have been summarized into just less than 100 words. Isn't that magical? This analytics is really going to help to understand the complaint rapidly and thus act on it rapidly. So my friends, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If yes, please do not forget to subscribe to the channel. And if you have some complaint data, I would recommend that you can upload that on datajarvis.ai. Try to get insights, try to see on how to manage all these complaints and keep your customers happy and satisfied. See you soon in another exciting video.